It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. Well, we got some hefty stuff to cover this morning. Got to tell you, man, we're in a mess here. You're joining us live on our website. That's great news. Glad to see you folks out there this morning. I see Tacoma out there. I see Baltimore. I see Baton Rouge. I've seen you folks from Baton Rouge every once in a while. Lincoln, Nebraska. I see Chicago out there. Texas, Florida. I see California out there. I see folks out there in Forney. I think that's Texas. So good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I see some folks out there in the Midwest as well, and we're always glad to have you folks on board. I appreciate your catching us live every morning on AVN. If you are watching us or listening to us on Patriot FB, glad to have you folks on board as well. If you're listening to this show on Big Country 99, this is a pre-recorded version. We broadcast live 8 to 10, so thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to catch the program live, you can do so at 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday, and you can listen right here on americasvoicenow.org. You can either watch it or listen to it, your preference. So, yesterday afternoon, the president came out and announced a new budget, if you want to call it that. I wouldn't call it that because that would be a misnomer. What he actually proposed was a brand new $8.3 trillion increase in our debt and a $1.8 trillion tax increase. Yeah. Now, I'll grant you that's over the course of the next decade. And as everyone knows, first of all, he was late a month, which is illegal. But just another sign of how Congress and the presidency and the executive and legislative treat the law as if it's their own personal loophole jumping rope. But more importantly, this is over the course of a decade, and everyone knows that the president's budget is a joke. No one follows it. It's not expected to be one that will actually be adopted. And, to be honest with you, it flies directly in the face of the budget deal that they just cut only 2 months ago. It increases the spending over and above that, which is what he just agreed to. So the joke is, I guess it's on us. I don't know. At this point, folks, I'm so perplexed as to how this whole how the whole Titanic is remaining afloat. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We're so far underwater at this stage in the game, and one of the things I'm going to talk about in our later segment is the fact that when we look here at, I posted an article up about how the global super rich are eyeing office blocks over mansions that as an investment for their money, and they're talking about the fact that there's $20 trillion, as their collected value. And it's not that I care about the lives of the rich and famous. I couldn't care less. But what I wanted to post this for, and I put my commentary above it, is that the alternative way to look at this is to recognize that if the global super rich only have a collected value of $20 trillion, that should alert you to the impossibility of being able to pay off a debt which right now is $17.4 trillion just for the United States alone. And that's only the immediate debt that we have. That's not the long-term debt for the uncovered mandates that we have through all of these entitlements. If you look at that debt, it's in addition to the $17 trillion, and it's another $200 trillion. So in other words, folks, let's understand it this way. If you were to sit there and take the wealth of every person that is considered super wealthy in the world, we would barely be able to pay off just our national debt. Forget the rest of the planet. We'd have to confiscate the wealth of everyone who's classified as super rich in order just to pay off our own debt. And that wouldn't even begin to tap into the $200 trillion that we have we have no money for. I mean, this is insane. Anyone who thinks this bubble cannot or will not burst is fooling themselves. Really. Our second topic this morning is going to be the defense and the Pentagon and how they are injecting the hoax of climate change into their planning and into their policies. Now, the problem I have with that, of course, is fairly easy to recognize. If you're going to create a national path of action and you're going to create budgets and develop the planning and the strategy of how you're going to protect and defend your nation, and not only domestically but internationally, and you're going to inject something which is as fantastically unreal as unicorns into the mix, you can't possibly come out with a number at the end or a plan at the end that makes any sense. And injecting something like climate change into our national defense policy is tantamount to treason, because it's building a project plan on false information that everyone acknowledges now is false, except for these idiots up in the executive and the Congress that pretend that even though there's mountains of evidence out there discrediting the climate change hoax that's been perpetrated on America, not to mention what's the evidence sitting right outside your front door. I mean, this is absurd. It really is. It's not absurd, it's embarrassing, and frankly, it's dangerous. This is treasonous activity on the part of the Pentagon to do this. And I got to tell you, the DOD, Department of Defense, and the Pentagon, in addition to that, they have been, so adamant about injecting false reality into the planning of how they go about determining what they're going to do to protect and defend the country. We're building expectations that don't exist. And since their sole function, their primary directive, their prime directive as an existence is to defend the nation, injecting climate change into that and calling it a threat multiplier that will affect, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it, but injecting that as an argument that climate change, causes poverty around the world, and of course that prompts terrorism, is just a flat-out lie. And I don't know about you, but I've had enough of it. I've had enough of lies, and I've had enough nonsense. Our third topic is a very interesting one. There's a story published this morning in the New York Times about how the CIA has been caught spying on the aides for the Senate Intelligence Committee that's actually investigating the CIA. You've got to be kidding me. No, I'm not. The CIA spied on staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee that was investigating the CIA for their detention program, an illegal program where they were detaining individuals and hauling them off to foreign countries where they could interrogate them without, anyone knowing about it. And I got to tell you, folks, you've heard the song from Pink Floyd called The Dogs of War. I've played it before. These people and the secrets of this agency and the Senate Oversight Committee and how they're dealing with it as a secret, it just goes to show you how complex the web is that these traitors have weaved. And I have to tell you, I don't trust a single player in this game. Not a single one. The person, believe it or not, who is leading the charge on, part of this investigation is none other than Feinstein herself. And the level of betrayal here is so far, it's not tantamount to treason, folks. It's beyond treason. It's beyond treason. They may couch themselves and swear up and down that they're actually doing this to protect and defend the United States of America. And I'm here to tell you, nothing is further from the truth. Okay, our fourth topic this morning is going to be based on the Pefecta of home defense weaponry. And I'm going to tell you why. We are reaching a point where it's clear, it should be clear to everyone right now, that we have reached an impasse at which we can no longer believe that all you got to do is look at this budget from Obama and look at the traitors in Congress, the traitors in the judiciary and the judgeships, and how they're supporting and defending that which is inexcusable. The complete, flat-out, and utter betrayal of the executive. And you don't have to be, you don't have to have a political science degree to see where this is going. You don't have to be an economist from Harvard to see where this is going. You don't have to be a study of totalitarianism to see where this is headed. And you don't have to be a prepper either. But you do have to recognize that we are rapidly reaching a point in which this kind of weaponry is going to be almost a mandatory requirement for every home. In fact, it's way beyond that. You should have this now. What you're seeing going on in Connecticut, in New York, and Maryland, and other states where they have injected and incorporated complete and utter destruction of the Second Amendment principles, tells you that you should be working towards making sure that you have the wherewithal and the means to defend yourself and your family. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my opinions on what weaponry and calibers are ideal for home defense and resistance. All right, let's get into our first topic because we'll run out of time if we don't, quite honestly. Obama's new $8.3 trillion budget. He's incorporating that as new debt. That's just the debt, people. And on top of that, he's trying to offset that with hikes in taxes by $1.8 trillion. Now, this is a joint analysis by the Republicans on the Senate and the House Budget Committee. So, they'll claim the numbers are high. It doesn't really matter. When we're talking about this kind of money, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, it doesn't really make a difference. Even if the Democrats turn around and scream up and down, it's not 8.3 trillion, it's 7.1. I mean, it's a joke. You can't have new debt incorporated into a debt that's already in excess of $17.4 trillion and expect that at any given time this nation is ever going to be able to pay that off. Obama came out and said, these kids may not be the most excited people in town on budget day. He was talking to some schools. But my budget is designed with their generation and future generations in mind. What he was trying to say is how his budget is designed to enhance their lives. What he really meant was that it was designed with how they're going to be responsible to pay off that which no one can pay off. He said his budget will make, quote, smart investments. Investment, by the way, is code word for the giant sucking sound of money from your pocket. And these smart investments will address global warming, which, again, I'm going to talk about it again. Look out your door. Look at the hoax of global warming and climate change. Look at the discredited scientists, the politicians, those who are profiting from it, the profiteers of global warming. And ask yourself this question: does it exist, or am I being played for a fool? The whole idea of cap and trade and carbon tax and all of that nonsense, all of that is code word or code for another way to siphon the resources away from the middle class of America. The reason why that resources have to be siphoned from you is very simple. When you're broke, you cannot defend and fight back. You cannot resist when you cannot afford food and ammunition and medical supplies for your family. That's the goal, folks. Make no mistake about it. The position that and the direction that we are headed is diametrically opposed to your benefit. He wants to provide, quote, preschool for all. That, ladies and gentlemen, is code word for early indoctrination. They're not satisfied that they've got your kids in kindergarten through 12th grade. Now they want to have preschool so that they can begin to indoctrinate them at an even earlier age, because it sets the stage to jack with the minds of generations. If you think for a moment, and of course, you know, if you're a parent who's struggling and you're a single mom and you're trying to make ends meet, you know, you're thinking to yourself, wow, preschool would allow me to start work a year earlier and maybe get out there into the workforce and drag myself above the poverty level. Well, let me tell you something. Johnson was the start of the war on poverty. We have spent over $1 trillion on the war on poverty, and we are below the poverty levels that existed at the time that the war began. It is a complete and utter epic failure. There is no way that what they are breeding is dependency. They're not breeding a solution to the war on poverty. They are expanding poverty, if anything. And they're doing so at an enormous expense to the nation. That $1 trillion that was expended came out of the pockets of those who are working. And it's been squandered, like throwing your pearls before swine. To make matters worse, the reality of it is that the $1 trillion never made it to the poor. You see, these guys are on a par with like UNICEF, where only 12 cents out of every dollar ever actually makes it to the people that you're allegedly feeding in over some country where they show you a picture on TV of a little kid with his belly distended and beg for money, and you hand it over to them, and 60% is gobbled up on advertising and administrative costs, and then the other 20% is gobbled up on the budgets and the income for those people who work there, and 12 or 15, maybe 20 cents makes it to the poor kid who hasn't eaten in a week. It's the same scam, just with the government's stamp of approval and label on it. It's no different than any of the other charity scams that have been perpetrated across the ages on Americans, or any other culture for that matter. Preschool for All is an early indoctrination program. You should call it what it is, recognize it for what it is, and avoid it like the plague. If your children are currently in school today and Common Core is being implemented in your state, my best advice to you is withdraw them from school and homeschool them. Because what they're having siphoned into their minds, and when I say siphoned, it's not a trickle. It's being forced in at a fire hose torrent rate. Is globalization, indoctrination to be an automaton, a cog in the wheel of the worst treason that's ever been perpetrated on a people. See, we were the freest country. Now we're shortly going to be the most enslaved. Why? Well, when other countries enslave people, take a look at, Mugabe or somebody like that. The country has no wealth to begin with. The people don't have any work to begin with. 80% of the country is unemployed. So when you take over a country like that and siphon the wealth off, you're only hurting. There's only 20% of the people working anyway. In a country like this, where you have a much higher rate and level of employment, and production and the resources are much greater, you have a totally different game. Because now it's not a fixed finite set of resources that you can draw from until it's just depleted. Now you have an ongoing source, and the resource is not the natural resources, it's your labor. It's your effort. It's your sweat. It's your tears. It's your blood. He goes on to say that in this budget, he's going to ensure that the wealthy are, quote, paying their fair share. Well, let me tell you the truth of this issue. For the wealthy to pay their fair share would require, and I posted an article up about this, which I mentioned earlier, in order for that to happen, the global super rich, which have a collected value of $20 trillion, would have to have every penny stolen and absconded from them. Every single penny without fail. There's an article in Yahoo that's global super rich eye office blocks over mansions as their wealth hits $20 trillion. So think about it for a moment. How is it that he can ensure that the wealthy are paying their fair share when already they probably, and I don't know these statistics off the top of my head. I've gone over them many, many times over the years. But, the top 10% pay, 80% of all the bills. How much more fair share can they pay? Unless you start skimming the 401ks, the retirement accounts of every American. And if you don't think that's what's coming, kids, let me tell you something. You're in for a rude awakening. What this budget does is it exposes this administration for the treasonous, betrayal-laden, confiscatory executive and Congress that we have. Washington has become enemy number one of the people. Make no mistake about it, and ignore it at your own risk and at your own peril. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to tackle our second topic this morning, the issue of the defense and the defense budget and their planning and the climate change hoax and how that all interplays to essentially destroy any possibility that this nation can ever properly defend itself. And we're going to also talk a little bit about our global visage on the world stage. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. I would ask you to support our sponsors as we move forward. Before we take this quick break, let me just give you some rundown. You got the folks over at Wits End Classic Barbershop on the square in West Plains, as well as Patriot Cigar and Tobacco, where you can get every accessory and all kinds of tobacco products. The law offices of Jason Henry, that is located over on the square as well. You can reach him by calling 417-256-4100. Our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, where you can get Tuesdays and Thursdays, our reduced lunch days, and on Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday evening, it's family night and kids under 12 eat free. Our friends over at the Battery Station, also on Washington Avenue in West Plains. You can reach them by going to their website at batterystation.com. You can also call them at 417-257-7799. And last but not least, our friends over at Mini Mart Expresses 1 and 2, where you can find those folks over on the corner of 14 and 63 in Granny's Cafe's old building. They have a brand new location there, and I encourage you to get over there. If you have an opportunity to use their drive-thru, we'll be back in just a moment. Listening to America's Voice Now. Thank you for joining with us live. If you are catching us on Big Country 99, this is a pre-recorded program, and appreciate you folks catching the program. You can watch it live every morning or listen live, your preference, every morning by going to americasvoicenow.org. And there you have your choice of either audio only or video. If you don't want me to crack the screen on your monitor, then you might want to just listen to the audio, which is fed through our Spreaker podcasting feed and offers a great way for you to catch the show in audio only. That way you can continue working, and you don't have my mug to distract you. You know, the issue of the defense and the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and how they are injecting the false hoax of climate change into our national system of defense and protection is so far outside the boundaries and the scope of what the Pentagon should be doing that, quite frankly, I see no hope for these people. You got a guy like Chuck Hagel out there panning on how this is such a great, this is such a great and important mission they're on. And he's stating that climate change issues are threat multipliers that force the Pentagon to rethink how it engages in training, missions, and humanitarian aid around the world. Stop right there. First of all, the Pentagon's job is not humanitarian aid. Secondly, there is no such thing as climate change. I'm not suggesting that the planet doesn't go through it. I am suggesting, or in fact, I'm not suggesting, I'm emphatically stating that the United States of America and our commercial enterprises are not the cause of a global climate change. And if you think that I'm wrong here and you say, well, wait a minute, it's not just the United States, it's China and Russia and Indonesia and India and, well, I get it, but we're not going to single-handedly make a dent in any of that by unilaterally cutting our own throat and allowing our lifeblood to spill out. I mean, to make a 0.1% change in the global warming debate. I mean, it's just absurd. We have been shutting coal plants down in this nation at a rate that we have never seen before, all on a bunch of false science that doesn't even exist and is made up of whole cloth, to use Harry Reid, Dirty Harry Reid's words, to achieve an agenda that, and I understand where this comes from. I mean, look, if we had an alternative solution to the issue of coal as an energy generator, I'd say fine. Take the coal and over a period of time, ramp it down while you ramp up something else, and somewhere in the middle it's going to cross and we're going to be fine. But we don't have a replacement for coal. 6% of our energy is generated by the alternative energy solutions out there. And that includes a combination of wind and water and solar. We've spent hundreds of billions of dollars enriching the coffers of the cronies of this administration based on a false hoax and false science that climate change exists. And now we're going to do the same thing through the Pentagon with enormous sums of money spent, drawn off from whatever piddling little bit you've got available to you. We're going to change our entire stance and posture on the national, international, and global scene. We're going to modify how we do our training and our missions based on science, which is false. Ladies and gentlemen, that's treason. Maybe not in the defined word where you say, okay, you got a specific act that you can point to that says, this person tried to assassinate a head of state. But a wholesale attempt to destroy the nation from the inside, utilizing, false science, is no different. May not be as directed and focused as trying to, to follow the definition of treason as an official. It's to, as an official definition, one of them, and only one of them, says that you can utilize treason as the attempt to terminate a head of state. But it also stands for aiding and abetting the enemy. And the enemy doesn't necessarily have to be some specific nationalistic organization. It can be as simple as destroying us from the inside to the benefit of our enemies. Who are those? Al-Qaeda, China, Russia, all totalitarians around the world, Venezuela, Maduro. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, that we have completely upended everything about our nation that makes any sense. There's no gravity left on the planet. We're going to change our training and our missions and our humanitarian aid around the world. Let's get to the humanitarian aid part. There are untold numbers of humanitarian aid organizations out there. Some funded by government, some funded by private donations. But the Pentagon and the Department of Defense is not one of them. It shouldn't be one of them. That's not their role. They are there to defend. Now, I'm not suggesting that, they can't use helicopters to fly in food to, an area ravaged by a storm or something like that. But, look, that's not the primary goal, and that's not the prime function and the prime motivator of our Department of Defense. It never has been, and it shouldn't be considered or is construed to be so now. To make the argument that it is to ignore reality and continue to perpetrate a lie. They're stating here that it's an aggregate stressor. And it aggravates poverty, environmental degradation, political instability, and social tensions. Conditions that can enable terrorist activity and other forms of violence. Okay. The word Department of Defense, the phrase Department of Defense, as the key operative word of defense. That means that we should be defending our own borders first and foremost. And I've got to tell you something, folks. It's not terrorist activity being generated by climate change. Terrorist activity is being generated because of our imperialistic meddling in everyone else's affairs. Terrorist activity is not being created by poverty that we have no way to alleviate. It's not being created by environmental degradation that we're not responsible for. It's not being created by political instability that we're responsible for, unless you talk about how we keep injecting ourselves into everybody else's business. The social tensions are those tensions which are the average grassroots people who are just sick and tired of tyrants and tyranny. The social tensions are people who rise up against whom? The likes of Washington. The likes of the monsters over in Putin and over in Russia. The likes of the people who are rising up against the Chinese totalitarian government. The likes of people down in Venezuela who are rising up against Maduro. That's the social tension. Stop being tyrannical. Stop being totalitarian. Stop oppressing your own people, and they'll stop uprising. You don't build a national posture of defense based on things which have no correlation whatsoever to defense. The ridiculous part of this entire thing is the Pentagon is attempting to utilize this kind of argument to fund itself and to increase its funding. And meanwhile, we're the laughingstock of the world. I posted an article up from the Times of Israel this morning about an Iranian general who says Obama's threats are, quote, the joke of the year. He calls Obama a low IQ president whose threat to launch a military offensive if nuclear talks fail with Iran. And he calls it an often cited punchline in the Islamic Republic, particularly amongst children. Now, if you want to know what foments social tension and political instability, it's the idea that kids are growing up with the for the first time ever with the concept that the United States is weak, ineffectual, incompetent, inept, impotent. These people are targeting all the wrong stuff. This is a quote. The low IQ U.S. president and his country's Secretary of State, John Kerry, speak of the effectiveness of the, quote, the U.S. options are all on the table, end quote, on Iran. While this phrase is mocked at and has become a joke among the Iranian nation, especially our children. That was General Masoud Jazayeri. He was talking in reference to a Bloomberg interview with President Obama that was run last week, done on Sunday, and during the course of that interview, Obama made the statement that all options are on the table, which he uses frequently. Him and Kerry both use it. Kerry is Lurch. Have you ever looked at him? I mean, is he not becoming more Lurch-like every moment? You rang. Listen to the mumble mouth of and the flannel mouth of Obama. We have a high degree of confidence that when they look at 35,000 U.S. military personnel in the region that are engaged in constant training exercises under the direction of a president who has already shown himself willing to take military action in the past, that they should take my statements seriously. You know, I don't take him seriously. Why should they? They published in the Iranian newspapers a cartoon that mocks him. The name of the cartoon is All Options on the Table, this time for Russia. And in it, it shows a picture of Obama peering into an empty paint can. And the label on the paint can says Red Line. And they also show Putin walking away saying, I think you used it all on Syria. In other words, he's out of paint. Ladies and gentlemen, is it any surprise that the world looks upon us as ineffectual, incompetent, and eunuchs who are completely and totally impotent? This president has done everything within his power to discredit, destroy the capabilities, and ruin the capability and the stance of this nation to defend itself and its interests abroad. They have, over the course of the past few years, completely gutted the military of any individuals in there who would be construed to be valuable to the nation on a defensive platform and would have stood up against what they've been doing. They are pouring the the treasure of the United States into these lame projects, stealing the resources and the treasure of the United States of America. Not just into the DOD, but all the rest of this crap too. You know, we're talking about the war on poverty and all the other nonsense. We're a laughing stock of the world. We are a joke. And it's amazing how we've fallen here so quickly. It's only taken us 10 years to get to this point. I mean, these people look at us and they recognize that we are sitting here with a mask on, and we're infusing ourselves with unicorn fart. It's a fantasy. I heard the other day Merkel come out and say that Putin is living in or not living in reality over this thing in the Ukraine. And Obama came out and said basically the same thing. I got to tell you, folks, the reality is he's already in control of Crimea. The odds are at the end of the day he's either going to end up with that and the whole eastern portion of the Ukraine, or maybe the entire Ukraine. Who's not living in reality? They're not living in reality. Hegel is not living in reality. To develop and present our national and international stance in defense of our nation and base it on unicorn theory is beyond acceptance. Our enemies look at us with disdain. They have absolutely no fear of us, and they realize that we are a paper tiger. They see us abusing our own citizenry, eviscerating and shredding our own Constitution and our own Bill of Rights on our own people, while simultaneously taking the money from them to go out and try to subjugate other populations around the world. We have an imperialistic approach. We're into this concept of nation building, which isn't nation building. It's an imperialistic, we're part of the responsibility for fomenting the trouble in the Ukraine. We've pumped billions of dollars into that event. Most of it, by the way, so that the IMF can go in there and lend them money and apply austerity and strip the wealth off of that country. When, America, will you awaken and recognize that you're being played on a planetary level? You're being played on a level that is so large it encompasses the universe. You hear of the vast right-wing conspiracy. This isn't a right-wing conspiracy. This is a vast global conspiracy. And all attempts to dissuade you from its belief have worked to the point where you don't even realize it's happening. To believe that our involvement on an international scale is really humanitarian, it's beyond comprehension. The proof is all around you. The super wealthy are growing super wealthier by the moment. The nations around the planet are being laden with debt that is incomprehensible and impossible to ever pay off. Every government in operation today, including our own, and in fact we've taken the lead, are actively working at the enslavement, and I do mean enslavement in the traditional sense, of their populations. It's fostered by the ultra-rich, the central bankers, the power players, the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR out of Washington and New York. There's a small oligarchy of 1 million, 2 million people planetary-wide. Out of 7.5 billion people, there's 2 million, maybe, at best, that are pulling the strings for everybody else. Is that so hard to fathom? Is it so hard to believe? Really? If we see here an example of that in the United States, of a couple of thousand that are, for all intents and purposes, playing and creating a set of rules that enables and enriches them at the expense of the 315 million of the rest of us, why is it so hard to believe that it's being done on a planetary basis? I don't understand it. I'm not wearing some kind of a tinfoil hat here. Look around you at the evidence. It is everywhere. This isn't some kind of fantasy. The fantasy is how they portray themselves to you, and the absurdity is that you believe it. We've fallen so far down the rabbit hole. We really, I got to tell you, America, I cannot foresee a positive political solution here. Not just here in the domestic United States, globally. You know, Putin is because of his world stance, he's visible. But there's 1,000 little tyrants just like him in places all over the country, all over the world. We've got 1,000 little tyrants like him right here. I don't understand why people will not listen to the small voice inside. You know, empirically, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that something is terribly, terribly wrong. It's overwhelming. You may not understand all of it. But your failure to take action, your failure to participate in the process, your failure to awaken and educate yourself, that will be your undoing. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about this, the idea of the CIA, who's been caught spying on the Senate Intelligence Committee that's actually investigating the CIA. I mean, come on, people. What the heck is happening here? You can't tell me that there's not something desperately, horribly, critically, criminally wrong with that. And that, when you compile it with everything else that's going on and all the surveillance and spying and all of that nonsense, you got to be kidding me. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. Hang on a minute. We'll be back in just a moment. If you have an opportunity, please make sure that you visit our sponsors, including Battery Station at batterystation.com, 417-257-7799. Our friends at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Please make sure that you say hi to Bruce while you're there and let him know you heard about it here on AVN. Jason Henry's Law Offices, located on Court Square in West Plains, 256-4100. Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop and Wits End Classic Barbershop, both on the square. Excellent friends of ours and real big supporters of this program. Last and not least, our friends over at Mini Mart Expresses 1 and 2. Express 1 is right across the street from the city pool. And they have the lowest prices on, guaranteed prices on cigarettes and tobacco products, as well as fountain drinks. Make sure that you swing in there and you see those folks. They're great people and they're great patriots for fighting for this nation. So do your part and help them out as well. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. You're listening to America's Voice Now.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. You're catching us in our third segment this morning. If you've missed the first two, you can find them on our website, where you can catch them on either audio or video. We post every show that we do up on YouTube at the end of the morning, and we encourage you to see those videos, share them with other people. YouTube works actively to make sure that we do not have a high visibility on their channel. They are owned by Google. They work actively to make sure that you do not have an opportunity to see these videos. Do yourself and your friends a favor and share them. It's almost statistically impossible that our view or total views available is as low as it is. And it's not that the program doesn't talk about things that everybody's interested in hearing. It's that they actively seek to shut it down. And I know for a fact they do, because I've had people tell me that they cannot find certain videos, they don't play, things like that. It's up to you to change that, folks. So, all right. I'm not going to cry my woes here, but, we've reached a point where the activity that is being perpetrated against those people in the country should be clear to everyone. Look at the IRS. Look at what they've been doing to patriot groups. Look at how our entire national infrastructure, every agency in the country, from the EPA to the IRS to the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the FAA, the FCC, they're all being refocused to target and focus their attention against enemies of the administration. What part of that don't you see? This morning in the New York Times, which is, got to be one of the most left-leaning and administratively supportive of the Obama regime. There's an article out there about CIA employees are facing new inquiries amid clashes on a detention program because they've been caught spying. And wait until you hear this. They've been caught spying on the Senate Intelligence Committee that's actually investigating the CIA. So, hold on a minute. Tell me this is not a rogue agency. You've got a Senate Intelligence Committee whose job is oversight of the CIA, to make sure that they're not violating law, that they're doing things the right way, that they're actively working in the best interest of the country, blah, 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 blah. All the normal crap you hear. Meanwhile, in their attempt to oversee this agency, and everything, of course, has to be kept secret because they're a secret agency, and so everything's a secret of the secret of the secret of the secret. It turns out that they've actually been spying on the aides and the assistants, and I'm sure the Senate members themselves, who are actually investigating the agency. So, let's see. The CIA spies on the agency that's required by law to oversee it. And America is, that would be the equivalent of giving the prosecutor access to the private conversations and phone calls and information in the file of your attorney. Why would you do that? Why would that be construed as acceptable to anyone? The investigation they've been doing is on this detention and interrogation program. And the CIA, their own internal watchdog, was conducting one of these reviews. And as a result of his investigation into agency employees, he began this inquiry because a number of the members of Congress were complaining that CIA employees were improperly monitoring the work of these staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and that they were, excuse me, I'm having a hard time this morning, that they were monitoring their communications and so forth. Committee, according to the article, the committee has spent several years working on a voluminous report about the detention and interrogation program, and according to one official interviewed in recent days, CIA officers went as far as gaining access to the computer networks used by the committee to carry out its investigation. So let's see. You can go in there and gain access to their computers because you're the CIA and you've got all this super secret spy equipment and you've got all of these ways and methods and means to hack and break through security. Have they changed any of the documentation that was in those files in order to cover themselves up and protect themselves? Do you not see the complete and total breakdown of anything that even remotely resembles ethics, honor, integrity, rule of law, constitutional principles, moral principles, ethical principles? No, you don't. There is no relevance to those issues. You know, there's a song out there. It was produced by a group that you may or may not know. It's called Pink Floyd, and they've got this song out there called "The Dogs of War." And the truth is, the lyrics are so accurately appropriate to not only this situation, but many, many, many others involving these super secret spy agencies. I got to tell you, there is nothing that you or I or anyone else, whether in Congress or whether in some committee, does that is not monitored, listened to, captured, saved, and edited at will of these monsters. The truth is, they can manipulate data. They cause wars. They lie to the people who have to make the decisions about whether or not the war should actually occur. And the truth is, it is unconscionable and illegal and unethical behavior. For us to allow it to continue is tantamount to self-treason, ladies and gentlemen. And even our masters don't know the webs we weave. Ladies and gentlemen, what more proof do you need than an organization that's hacking the files of another organization that's required to oversee it? You got to be kidding me. Who is running this country? What's really going on here? This isn't Mike with some kind of belief that something is going on here that is inappropriate. This is the Senate Investigation Committee themselves claiming that they've been hacked by the CIA, who they're investigating. Dianne Feinstein came out. She's the chairwoman of the Intelligence Committee. I can say a lot of things about Dianne Feinstein, but I'm going to withhold them. She was questioned about the dispute on Tuesday when she left a closed committee hearing. It wasn't on that. It was on the Ukraine. But she did admit that the CIA has begun an internal review on their own people. Now, I got to stop you right there. Because here we are talking about the CIA hacking into congressional files, congressional computer systems, and you're telling me that they're going to have an inspector general who is a wolf, and he's going to investigate the other wolves to determine whether or not they've been eating the sheep, and you expect some kind of real result to come out of that? Wow. Wow. You see, this goes to the argument of the ombudsman, which I'd made before, repeatedly, over the years. These inspector generals work for the agency. They're paid for by government. They're easily manipulated or pressured or coerced or co-opted. And so we have no level of accountability going on anywhere in Congress, anywhere in the military, anywhere in the CIA, anywhere in the intelligence community. There is nobody watching. You've got these people manipulating the government of the United States of America. This article goes on to say that the events have elevated the protracted battle, which began as a fight over who writes the history of the program, perhaps the most controversial aspect of the American government's response to the September 11 attacks, into a bitter standoff that in essence is a dispute over the separation of powers and congressional oversight of spy agencies. The specifics of the Inspector General's investigation are unclear. No kidding. See, that's what we constantly hear. It's under investigation. We can't discuss it. But several officials interviewed in recent days, all of whom insisted on anonymity, citing a continuing inquiry, said it began after the CIA took what Senator Mark Udall, Democrat of Colorado, on Tuesday called a, quote, unprecedented action against the committee. The action, which Mr. Udall did not describe, took place after CIA officials came to suspect that congressional staff members had gained unauthorized access to agency documents during the course of the Intelligence Committee's years-long investigation in the detention and interrogation program. Stop. Hold on a moment. Let's understand what that clause that paragraph just said. The CIA found out that congressional staff members had gained what they classify to be or quantify to be unauthorized access to agency documents during the course of the Intelligence Committee's investigation. If the premise and the purpose of the Intelligence Committee is to keep an eye on and be a watchdog over the CIA, how is it that you can tell me that they are not entitled to have complete access to everything? These people have the highest clearance on the face of the earth. They have higher clearance than, in some cases, the President of the United States. And you're going to sit here and tell me that the CIA is upset because this committee gained access to documents that the CIA wanted hidden away, and they're calling it unauthorized access? In a murder investigation, do you prohibit the police from going in and looking inside the safe where the murder occurred? Do you prohibit them from being able to read the diary of the person who was the murderer or the murdered? Do you say, well, you can investigate the murder, but you're not allowed to look on the guy's computer? Goes on to say that it is not known what the agency's inspector general, this is the internal watchdog, right? This is the This is the internal investigator within the CIA who's supposed to investigate the CIA when they do wrong. It is not known what the agency's Inspector General, David Buckley, has found in the investigation, or whether Mr. Buckley has referred any cases to the Justice Department for further investigation. Spokesman for the agency and the Justice Department declined to comment.
Doc, what's up? He went that-a-way, Doc. He went that-a-way.
Feinstein confirmed there is an IG investigation. No kidding. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Asked about the tension between the committee and the spy agency that it oversees, Feinstein's sole response was, "Our oversight role will prevail." Wow. That's telling. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't say. If your oversight role will prevail, that tells me that there's some question from the CIA about how they can thwart you. Because what you're suggesting is that there is an internal battle between the Senate Committee, Intelligence Committee, which is supposed to review, monitor, and keep the CIA legal. And if your oversight role is threatened, which is the only reason that it would, quote, prevail, one has to wonder about the depths of the depravity of what's really happening. The article goes on to say that the episode is a rare moment of public rancor between the intelligence agency and Feinstein's committee, which has been criticized in some quarters for its muscular defense of many of the controversial intelligence programs, from the surveillance operations exposed by the former NSA security contractor Edward Snowden to the Obama administration's targeted killing program using armed drones. So essentially what they're saying here is that the Intelligence Committee has been a strong advocate and a protector of these controversial intelligence programs in the first place. And even they are having trouble with the CIA. So you got to wonder, how far down the rabbit hole does it really go? If they've openly supported the NSA spying on everyday Americans and the capture of all of this data and information, and if they have supported and defended the Obama administration's targeted killing, and they've supported and defended the NDAA and all the rest of that stuff, which you and I call treason, but they've drawn the line on this CIA program, that raises the serious questions of how bad is it that even Feinstein would have a problem with it. Yeah, John Brennan. John Brennan, who is a questionable individual in and of himself. And if you don't know who John Brennan is, you should. He is a dangerous man. He was the top counterterrorism advisor during the Obama first term. And he has been well, first of all, if you don't know, he is a practicing Muslim. And I'm not suggesting that alone should disqualify him, but I'm saying in the face of all of the other issues that are going on there, it really raises the issue of whether or not he can and should be in a position to have this level of knowledge and insight into all of the practices and concepts and issues and everything related to our national security, defense, the CIA, all of their... I mean, as the chief of the CIA, why do we have a guy in there who is an open Muslim? And a convert at that. Has he radicalized? I don't know. Does anybody know? Nobody knows. All I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is that we are in so much trouble in this nation. It's not one thing. It's not even a host of things. It is a planet of things that are desperately wrong. Our government has become this monster. And no one's in control. And I do mean no one. They're sitting there trying to hold back a monster with thread. The future of our nation, the future of our freedom, the future of the planet is what's at stake. And all of it is being handled behind secret closed doors, negotiated by men and women who have no honor, no integrity. They have no respect for nations. They have no respect for sovereignty. They have no respect for individual rights. They only seek to mold and shape a world in their own view. And they act behind the scenes in ways that even the executive and the Congress cannot even conceive of. I don't know how we recover from this. I don't know how we separate and pull away from this. I don't know how we move to a position of appropriate oversight on this stuff. I'm not even sure it's possible. Man. All right, we're going to take a break. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. When we come back, we're going to talk about the topic of the Pefecta, you want to call it the trifecta, the Pefecta of home defense weaponry. I'm going to tell you why. We're literally on the cusp and on the edge of complete and utter collapse, fiscally, morally, ethically. Every aspect of our nation is under threat right now. Not from forces abroad, although that's part of it. But the greatest threat that we have right now is forces not abroad, but directly right here. And they think they've got control. They think they know how to manipulate this, manipulate that. They think that they can, play around with world global finances and things like that. But they all know they're riding on a bubble. We'll be right back. All right. We are back. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm the host here. And I appreciate you riding with us this morning. We're going to talk about a conversation or a topic that is controversial. And there's a lot of different folks out there that will have a different take on this. So this particular topic of what is the appropriate set of weaponry to have in your possession to defend your home and your family and your community, and perhaps ultimately your nation, is fraught with a lot of opinion. It's fraught with a lot of misconceptions, and but I think it's a timely discussion to be had. So these are my opinions. For those of you that don't know, I come from a firearms background where I'm pretty knowledgeable about them. And we're going to talk about the right products for you to have, the right calibers for you to have, and the reasons why. So let's start out with the basics. There are really 4 products that you need in a home defensive and self-defense, I'm going to use that word, posture. And this makes a difference, or this applies whether you are defending your home against street invaders or whether you are defending your home against confiscatory individuals kicking in your door, as they may soon have in Connecticut. The first thing you need to have is a carbine. And there are really, you need a carbine, you need a shotgun, and you need a pistol. And we're going to talk about the reasons or the appropriate solutions for each one. A carbine is a short rifle, for those of you that are not gun people. I always suggest that you have something that is semi-automatic in its nature, not a bolt action, and that it be of a caliber that is easily replaced and or obtained. And so there are only 2 calibers that you should be considering, and they are .308, also known as 7.62 by 51, and both of those are, for all intents and purposes, interchangeable, and or .223, also known as 5.56 millimeters, or .223. The AR platform is very popular. There are other platforms out there, but that is the one that is the most popular. It's been found to be extraordinarily reliable in a lot of ways, and the availability and access to parts and magazines and such like that is easily accomplished. It's an ergonomic system that enables you to, handle the weapon appropriately. They're easily, the number of accessories that are available for them in terms of sights and things like that is there's lots and lots and lots of modification parts and things that you can get. So the question now is, let's assume for argument's sake that we're talking about an AR platform, because I frankly would not authorize or utilize anything for a platform for personal defense other than an AR platform. I'm not going to, there's those people who believe that the AK series of weaponry that's, standard issue in Eastern Bloc is acceptable. And if you have that belief, that's fine. I'm just telling you my opinion. And in my opinion, the AR platform is the route to take. And then now the choice becomes one of 2 things. Are you talking about a .223 or a .308? Frankly, a .308 would be the preferential choice because it's a much heavier bullet. It travels has a lot more delivered energy when it reaches its intended target, and it has the capabilities to do things that the .223 platform cannot do. .308 can go through. You're talking about through metal. It can go through walls. It can go through cover and concealment in some cases. And so I would strongly recommend that if you have a choice and you can afford to do the .308 platform, that you go that route. If you have multiple people in your house, you can then look at having a combination of .223 and .308. So you might have multiple carbines. And frankly, if you've got adult or soon-to-be adult children, I'm going to tell you something right now. In my view, and this is going to be controversial, I get it, but in my view, there are only 3 things that are going to become a currency under a collapse, and those are going to be food, weapons and ammunition, and medical supplies. And I would strongly encourage you to become knowledgeable about all three and begin to gather and have that available to you. Whether it's for your own use or for the purposes of barter or trade, however you want to look at it, I got to tell you, folks, I know that this is a doomsday view for a lot of people, and they don't want to hear it. But, you know, I throw out the analogy and the statement from Ayn Rand, which is you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequence of reality. I'm going to throw that same comment out about what I talked about earlier with Angela Merkel and Barack Obama, both saying that Putin is not living in reality. I beg to differ. He is living in reality. You two are ignoring reality, and you cannot ignore the consequences of that reality, which is that he's now the owner of Crimea. You think it can't happen here. I'm here to tell you it's already happened here multiple times, and it will happen here again. The situation at this point is that you need to have a carbine, and I would strongly encourage you to have a 308 or a 223 or both, depending upon who in your family is available to handle these weapons. And then you need sufficient supplies of ammunition for both of these weapons that will enable you to defend and protect your home. In either case, I would not realistically accept less than perhaps 1,000 rounds. I think that's a reasonable expectation of what you would need that will enable you to have a long-term and or a short-term ability to protect and defend yourself and your family and your community. Because in the event of some kind of a fiscal collapse, and if it's elongated, if it lasts more than a couple of months, we could be, you could find yourself working together with community members to protect and defend your own town, your own city, your own community. The second item that you need, and I'm not going to have enough time to go here through, a ton of all the exponentials of each of these platforms, and because I've only got 20 minutes here, and we're down to 17. You need a carbine. It should be an AR platform, and it should be in either 308 or 223, and preferably, if you've got multiple people in the house, multiples of each. The second issue is a shotgun, and not Joe Biden's double-barrel shotgun. I would prefer that it be a semi-automatic or at least a pump, capable of having multiple shots. You can have an extended magazine, and by the way, folks, there are tons of these out there right now. Let's talk about cost for a moment, and I apologize. I should have jumped on this before we got off the idea of the AR carbine. You can get a 308 AR carbine and a 223 AR carbine in the $1,000 range. I'm going to just use that as a ballpark range. Whether new or used, you can obtain these weapons in that range, in that price range, about $1,000 for a good quality one. Don't skimp on quality. I don't care if you skimp somewhere else. Don't skimp on the quality of weaponry. When I used to teach, and I had a weapons store, the one thing that you don't skimp on is quality when it comes to a weapon, because Murphy's Law is still Murphy's Law, and if there's a time for something cheap or poor quality to fail, it's when you need it the most. And that's the one time when you cannot afford to have a failure, is when you are expecting that weapon to be the last resort of defense for you and your family. So I strongly encourage you to make sure that you are getting a quality piece of hardware. If you don't know anything about guns, if you buy it new, you still need to make sure that it's a quality piece of equipment. If it's used and you don't know anything about it, I would encourage you to have someone who is knowledgeable about it make sure that they go over it thoroughly for you and make sure that it's safe and that it's in good operating condition. You're going to know that shortly enough, by the way, because your goal is to make sure that you're out there practicing with it and that you are intimately, and I do mean intimately, familiar with how it operates. And not just, get out there and shoot a magazine's worth of rounds and say, okay, I'm confident and I know what to do. We're talking about the ability to change magazines. We're talking about the ability to take it down and clean it. We're talking about the ability to use it in multiple firing positions, whether standing or laying down or seated or around a wall. If you're not doing that kind of training, you are doing yourself and your family, who you're the defender of, a disservice. All right, let's talk a little bit about shotguns for a moment. You need one that is a semi-automatic. Forget the single shots. Forget the double barrels. I mean, if that's what you got and you don't have the money to afford anything else, that's fine. But, you need something as a defensive weapon that will allow you to have multiple shots and that will handle multiple variant forms of ammunition. I would encourage you to get a pump is in the price range of anywhere from $200 on up to $1,000 for a pump. The $200 and $300 pumps are just fine. Mossberg makes high-quality, inexpensive weaponry. Remington makes the 870 series. And you can buy these in what they call tactical configurations, where they already have an extended magazine tube that will allow you to have multiple extra shots available to you. Instead of 3 or 4, it'll handle 5 or 7 or 8. That's what you want. You want an extended magazine tube. Preferably you want something that has the equivalent of rifle sights or iron sights on it, because it will allow you to not only use it for defensive weapons or defensive rounds like buckshot, but it will also allow you to use a slug. And there are multiple forms of ammunition for shotguns. You have really 3 primary systems, or primary types of ammunition. One is a slug, which is basically a gigantic chunk of lead. The size of the bore, that's the size of the piece of lead. And that slug is capable of penetrating engine blocks. It is capable of punching through walls. It is capable of taking down a large animal in the event that you're using it for hunting. A slug is an excellent piece of ammunition to utilize with a shotgun. It doesn't spread. It's just one. It's a gigantic bullet. Think of it that way. And for rifle, to have a shotgun with rifle sights enables you to actually use that almost in a rifle format when you're using that slug. It gives you the high level of accuracy that you would expect out of a set of sights, as opposed to just a bead in the front. The second type of ammunition is buckshot, and the third is birdshot, what's commonly known as birdshot. Buckshot is essentially what it sounds like. You've all seen or heard it before. It is anywhere from 9 to 12 pellets. They're sizable, and they spread on firing. They can be used to cover a fairly broad area. The further out that you get away from the end of the muzzle, the more the spread is. When you're talking about buckshot, there are various different sizes of pellets. The one that is the most standard for you would be what's called 00. So it's 00 buckshot. Okay, it'll have 2 zeros. That's what I would recommend that you have, and that you have plenty of it. And you don't need 1,000 rounds of shotgun ammunition, but you should have a good, healthy supply. Hundreds of rounds would be appropriate. And I would have, if I were you, I would have a couple of 100 rounds of buckshot, and I would have at least 100 slugs. That would be an appropriate package for home defense. The third is birdshot, and birdshot is much smaller pellets and lots more of them. And, of course, they're great for hunting. They're also great for non-lethal pepper, and they can be lethal, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. You hit somebody with birdshot, and you hit them full in the face, and the odds are very good that they're not going to exit the room, at least standing. But they do have a tendency to spread wide, and they are ineffectual beyond a certain range. So the maximum range for birdshot starts, on its lethality, starts to evaporate rapidly based on distance. It doesn't hurt to have some birdshot around, and I would have at least a couple of 100 rounds of that. And I'll tell you why. It's great for hunting. It's great for small game. It's also great for a non-lethal way to disperse perpetrators. And so, while it wouldn't be my choice for home defense, it is better than nothing in a pinch, number one, and number two, it's great for hunting, and it's also a great way to practice inexpensively. Whatever I tell you here in a recommendation for ammunition should not be what you initially have or you practice with. This should be all this ammunition recommendation should be above and beyond what you use to practice. This should be safely stored away, okay? Kept clean, kept dry, and kept preferably sealed and boxed. The third item that you have to have, and again, we're going to run out of time here, is a carbine, as a pistol. And for this, I would strongly recommend the following caliber. Now, the idea of pistols comes down to a zillion different variants. There are two calibers that you want to worry about, 9mm and 45, and a third, which is a lower tier, which is 40 caliber. I'll explain the 40 in a moment. 45 has a lot of punching power, but it is not as often used by military and law enforcement these days. But it has a lot of stopping power. 9mm is heavily used by law enforcement, and it is also a NATO military round. And so it is an international NATO military round. And it is also used not just by NATO, but by other militaries as well. It's relatively inexpensive, relatively, I say, and it is relatively easily available. So your choices are 9mm, 45 caliber, or 40. The reason I say 40 is because these days most law enforcement agencies carry 40 caliber ammunition. And access to ammunition in a pinch, or the ability to utilize access stored, is critical. And so having access to a 40 caliber pistol, not a bad idea. If you are not a shooter and you don't already have a preference for what kind of a pistol to get, there are literally thousands of products out there. You need to have something that's extraordinarily reliable, and you need to have something that you can count on no matter what. There are really, if you're talking about 45, the platform for that would be the standard, what's called a 1911. And one day I'll actually do a discussion about the 1911 because the history of it is amazing. It was invented by John Brown in 1911 from Browning Arms. He then invented the Browning High Power in 1935, which was called the 35, P35. It was an improvement on the original 1911, in his opinion, and it fired a 9mm so you could double stack the magazine. But the 1911 is a very reliable platform, and again, you can find them very inexpensively, all the way up to completely outrageous. So they run from in the $300 and $400 range for a good, reliable quality machine or product, all the way up into the thousands of dollars. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars to get yourself a good quality 1911. If you're going to talk about a 40 or a 9mm or a 40 caliber 40 Smith & Wesson, then my strongest recommendation would be a gun which I personally didn't like very much when I was shooting all the time. And for those of you who know, I can't own a firearm. But Glock. It's a weapon that is readily available. They're relatively inexpensive. You can find them all over the place. Parts are readily available for them. And even though I don't like the way they handle personally, I don't like the way they fit in your hand, you can't knock their reliability. Many people love them. They just didn't fit me personally very well, but I can tell you this. They will be reliable. They will always work when you need them to. And the parts and replacement parts and repair parts and accessories for them, readily available. They can also utilize the same magazine between multiple sizes. And they have these little tiny micros. They have mid-sized, and then they have full-size pistols in all calibers. You can also obtain a Glock in a 45, a 40, a 9mm. You know, all of the calibers are available. Steer clear of things like 45 Gap, 357 SIG. Steer clear of those calibers. They're not military. They're not widely used by law enforcement. Access to ammunition, unless you got 1,000 rounds of your own, is really not highly. It will not be available in a real crunch. And while those performance levels of those weapons may have great functionality, access to ammunition in the long term may be a problem. For those of you that are already into pistols and you already have a Glock or something like that, and you think you'd like to be able to play around with some of those other calibers, fine. Then I would encourage you to maybe get yourself a second barrel system for the same Glock, so you can utilize the 357 SIG or 45 Gap or any of those others. I'm not a big fan of Glocks. I have no interest in Glock. I have no interest in any of the financial aspects of any of this. The only reason I'm saying that is because Glocks and Springfield Armory, they have a series called the XD that's also extremely reliable and very, very high quality. The XDs and the Glocks, by the way, can be purchased in the $400 to $600 range. And if you're going to have multiple pistols in the house, another reason why I suggest the Glock platform is, or the Springfield XD platform, and I'm not hinging here exclusively on Glock, but Springfield XD and Glock are both very, very reliable weapons. And the cool part is that if you've got multiple guns within the same household, all of the magazines are interchangeable. So make sure that if you're going to get a Glock, or you're going to get a Springfield, or you're going to get a 1911, you get weapons that have interchangeable magazines, so that if you want to share magazines amongst the two of you, or the three of you, however many weapons you have in your household, that all of those magazines are interchangeable. Why? Because, quite frankly, in a crunch, magazines won't be accessible either. And if you have them, your weapon is usable. If you don't have them, you may as well have a stick, because a weapon without a magazine is useless. I would avoid revolvers. I would avoid, and there's nothing wrong with having revolvers. And if you've got the means and the wherewithal to build a nice gun collection, that's a whole different conversation we can have. I'm just talking about those people who don't have anything and need the basics to get the ball rolling. So your choices are, on a pistol size, you're talking about either 9mm, preferably. That would be my first choice, 9mm. Why? Because it's widely accessible, it's relatively inexpensive in terms of pistol ammunition pricing, and it has the added value of being a NATO round. So in the event of a real emergency, you may even be able to get ammunition that's widely distributed through the military, irrespective of how that distribution is made. The second choice would be a .45 ACP, and the third would be .40 Smith & Wesson. The range and price, again, is in the $400 to $600 range on any of either the Glock or the Springfield Armory XD series. Both of those are very good. There's plenty of other guns out there, guys. I'm not knocking SIG, and I'm not knocking Smith & Wesson or Walther or any of them. I'm just talking about what's got the highest and most functional use. One of the other advantages of the Glock platform is that it's in use by almost, I would say, the vast majority of law enforcement agencies. And so in a pinch, you can even get magazines in that method. So remember that the idea of having interchangeable magazines, multiples of them, and by the way, there is no way that you should have a pistol that does not have at least 4 magazines per weapon, at the very minimum. Very minimum. On the carbine, you should have at least 10 magazines for each weapon. Whether it's a .223 or a .308, I don't care. 10 magazines would be accessible or acceptable and sufficient. More than that, great, but don't have less than 10. The only other weapon I'm going to comment on, because I'm down to 1 minute, is the ubiquitous .22 caliber. And you should, if possible, have both a pistol and a rifle. .22 is very, very effective. It can be used for hunting. It can be used for self-defense. And it's quiet. It's small. It's inexpensive, relatively. Right now, .22 is in a massive shortage. But even so, you can still buy 500 rounds of .22 for $50, $60. It's a great way to practice and get your skills up without spending an enormous amount on ammunition. And it's a great way to introduce the younger or uninitiated members of your family to shooting. There's very little recoil, and there's very little noise. And so I strongly encourage you to make sure that you make a .22 rifle and a pistol available and part of your lineup. We're out of time. We're down to 39 seconds. You're listening to America's Voice Now. I apologize that this time runs so short. One of these days, I'm really going to probably have to do a long-term discussion on this, in which, whether it's broadcast or not, or just post it up, I'll make it available. If you have more interest in this, please email me directly at mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. And let me know your thoughts on whether or not we should do more like this. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. Mike@americasvoicenow.org. Have a great day.